In the past, I believe, Pam, when people asked you about plant-based diets, you recommended it, but you didn't insist that people were 100% vegan. And Dr. Fuhrman, I believe the same, I don't know how many years ago. If someone came to you today and said, what should I eat? Do you tell them they need to be 100% plant-based, or do you say, well, what exactly do you say? Do they have to be 100% plant-based, or do you say they could have animal products in some amount? You and Dr. Fuhrman, yes.
We don't recommend 100% plant-based diet as our general recommendation. The blue zones, plenty of people out there living to 100 don't eat a vegan diet. I'm vegan. I'm a pretty public vegan, and so it's a choice that I made. But one of the things that I recognized when I started my business 25 years ago is the difference between buzz and traction. Traction is when you're actually gaining traction in the marketplace. And ours is a membership organization. So we see what happens to people over a long period of time, a lot of them, in a lot of different states of health and different states of motivation and everything else. So our idea is we start with a diet that we know is health promoting, that results in people getting well. I mean, the CHIP program has never been vegan, and there are 26 articles published in medical journals with the CHIP program showing that people reverse their cardiovascular disease and their diabetes. Ornish's program was not vegan in the beginning, and I'm not sure it still is. And he has published studies showing that these patients get better, even prostate cancer patients. So we start with that. Some people become what I call the accidental vegans. They make up their mind to do it later on. But what we've seen in 25 years is we have seen people who are able to sustain what is, by most standards, a pretty radical diet change for very long periods of time that isn't perfect. And that, to me, is more important than perfection for a few weeks and cycling in and out of the perfection. In fact, most of the people coming to us right now have been making attempts to do this. And part of the problem is not knowing what to do and being on medications they shouldn't have been on. But a lot of the problem is that they hold themselves to a standard which they can't seem to achieve and maintain, and then they fail, and then they cycle through and they start again. And that's the cycle we're trying to prevent and pull people out of. So, so that's what we're doing. I would rather see less perfection and longer sustainability. And by the way, our people get well too. We have thousands of people. We've worked with over 100,000 people in 33 countries. And our track record and our files are filled with people who eat less than perfect diets, who are doing very, very well in terms of low numbers, no repeat heart attacks, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my...
Well, I've written books and I've put out television shows, and I do advocate a diet that's nutrient-rich and plant-based, but it's plant-dense and plant-rich. But I do have said to people that they don't have to do it strictly on a vegan diet. They could use animal products as a condiment a few times a week, just a few ounces here and there. But I don't advocate that. It's that I don't want to turn a person off from jumping into this program if they don't want to be vegan at the very beginning. I want to let them know that that's not the critical factor of being a strict vegan, is not necessary to enter or begin this process, because I want more people to enter it and see how healing this can be. However, when people come to my retreat, and they're usually there for a couple of months, and they're not there spending all that money and all that time because they just want to try to eat some healthy food and get some recipes. They're there because they're really very sick. And they're food addicts, and they have obesity, and they have diabetes, and they have heart disease, or they have cancer, or they have psoriasis, or they have serious illnesses. And in those cases, we're not starting people, giving them the option of having a little bit of animal products in their diet. These are people who have serious conditions, and I feel that in those cases, it's like saying to them, do you want to drop 15 pounds this month and maximally reverse your psoriatic arthritis, or do you want to slow that down and only lose 5 pounds and maybe not get well? Or do you want to, in other words, if you have your cancer, should we give you all out with everything we can do to make you well, or should we just modify that a little bit? So of course I'm not going to offer that. So I prefer to offer the full vegan nutritarian kind of approach, and I don't offer anything other than that when people come to my retreat, because they're there for a reason, and we want to give them what's very best. But in the public outreach, we're going to show people the advantage of doing this all the way. But if they choose not to and want to use an animal product on occasion or in very small amounts, that doesn't have to dissuade them from entering the program.
I agree with that, and I think that that's an important distinction that we need to make, is that if I was running an immersion program like you are, I would serve vegan food. I have a commercial kitchen in my place. We don't make any animal food there. We don't serve any animal food there. People know what to do with chicken. They don't need chicken from us, right? So, but there is a difference, and I think you pointed out the crucial difference is that a person who is very sick and motivated, taking the time, that's one thing. People out in the community who we're trying to attract in is another thing. And I think if we lay down the gauntlet and basically say, our tent is very small, and you have to meet all these criteria to enter, I think we scare people away who could be romanced into this if we were not so strict. And some of them never give up animal foods. But again, if they're compliant over a long period of time on a excellent diet, better than 99.99999% of the people are eating in this country, and they're not sick anymore, I'll take that over 2 weeks of perfection. And then some of them, like I said, they will progress. We call them the accidental vegans. The people come in one day and go, you know what? I can't remember the last time I had chicken. I don't think I care about it anymore. But had we drawn the line in the sand in the beginning, they wouldn't have been there in the first place. And I think that's an important consideration. There are a lot of ways to start the pathway to health-promoting diets. I don't think that the two choices are baby steps or all the way vegan. That's what I call the sucker's choice, where you put two options that don't work for somebody down on the table and ask them to pick. All right? So why don't we look at the middle as a place where we can meet the public where they are and start drawing them in? And they often get attracted to what they see. But if we don't get them in, they're not going to be attracted to anything.
So this brings up the issue that we talk about in our book, The Pleasure Trap, the difference between the pleasure trap and the ego trap. You know, the pleasure trap we all recognize. You have a little bit, you want a lot. You don't tell alcoholics just to drink beer and wine, even though they'd like it, and you get more people to attend your quit drinking seminars. But we know over the long run, if they drink too much beer and wine, they're not going to be successful. So I don't disagree with either of you that offering a broad-scale, inclusive program to help people improve their health is the way to go. But it's not because of the meat, it's in spite of the meat that they're getting the tremendous results that they do in your programs. If a person's vulnerable to the pleasure trap, if they're an alcoholic, they know they can't have just a little bit. They got to stop drinking. We don't kid ourselves that you can have alcoholics be successful and continue to drink. And for some people, if they're struggling with overweight or various diseases, they may not be able to have a little bit and get the result that they want with their health. And so for those people, we try to explain to them they've got to take a much stricter approach in order to get well. At the True North Health Center, where we have a controlled environment, or Dr. Fuhrman's facilities where we have a controlled environment, it's relatively easy to enforce that. If you have a person that's vulnerable to the ego trap, though, where they don't want to even get started, or they get started but they won't continue because they can't be perfect, that can be a serious impediment to their long-term success. And so if we're trying to come up with a realistic, inclusive program that allows them to be successful, even if not perfect, certainly is reasonable. Unfortunately, not everybody can be successful in that because of the pleasure trap vulnerability. And for somebody that's vulnerable to both the pleasure trap and the ego trap, they have a very difficult path to follow and be successful with, which is why you'll see a very high failure rate amongst people that attempt to do that when they're vulnerable to both of those variables. In fact, we're doing a study right now at True North Health Center on adherence, really validating a questionnaire, looking at these optimized diets, figuring out what people do and how to support those people that do struggle with compliance. This is really probably the greatest challenge that we're all going to face, because we all up here know how to get people well. If the patients come to the center, the vast majority of the people that we accept will get well. When they go home, sometimes they falter. So I've decided I'm going to not let them go home anymore.
Yeah. One other thing I'll add, and Alan, you made such a good point, actually everybody's making such good points about this, is that, one of the things that's wrong with medicine is one size fits all. People complain about it to me all the time. I go to see my doctor, he looks at my lab results. You have this cholesterol, you get this statin drug. I mean, everything is very formulaic. Nobody's thinking, nobody's talking to anybody. And I think it's important for us to not do that. And so when you were talking about people who have addictive personalities and that sort of thing, I agree 100%. But let's take the alcohol issue, for example. Somebody could tell me, alcohol is bad for you. People become alcoholics and they wreck their cars and they lose their jobs and they beat up their wives and they go bankrupt. Okay, very true. I had 10 glasses of wine last year, so I don't know why you're telling me that, okay? So the point that I'm making is that I think it's important that we take into consideration the person we're working with. Isn't one of the things we're advertising is we're completely the opposite of everything medical out there? So we're dealing with people and their situations. That's what the barrier discussions are all about, because when people tell me things in my office that keep them from doing this that are just amazing. I have a guy whose wife's bringing home potato chips and gumdrops and putting them on the coffee table trying to tempt him to eat bad food because she doesn't like him. I mean, and of course what you want to say is, leave her, but you can't do that, right? So the point is that we're trying to be not the standardized thing where there's one size fits all. We don't care who you are, what your background is, what your problems are. Everybody does the same thing. So I think there's room for these variations that we're talking about. We have to listen to what people are saying to us and figure out how we're going to help them. And part of it is not having a one size fits all mentality. And I think some of the distinctions that have been made here are really, really good.
The only thing I would add to that is that when patients ask me what I think they should do, I tell them that I am absolutely convinced that an entirely plant-based diet is the healthiest diet that any human can consume. Now, I will tell them that I have scientific evidence that a mostly plant-based diet is healthy. I don't have the data that can absolutely prove that a strictly plant-based diet will be proved better than a mostly plant-based diet, but clearly that's where the evidence is pointing, and that it would be best for them to become to eliminate all animal foods from their diet. How dogmatic I am about emphasizing that depends on how sick they are. If there's somebody that's dealing with cancer or an autoimmune disease, I'm pretty dogmatic. I'm like, you got to leave this crap alone because it's killing you. And if you don't, it's going to kill you. If there's somebody who's doing it because they want to get healthier, they want to live better, I'm like, this is what our goal is. But the other thing that I really do emphasize to them is that when you were learning to walk and you fell on your butt, did you sit there and cry? No, you got up and you start walking again. So the fact is, yeah, you may slip and eat something you didn't want to or you shouldn't have, but that doesn't mean you throw in the towel and you give up. You say, okay, I screwed up, but I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna keep going. And that's the key thing, to keep going and not give up.